The Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, joining us once again from Westminster. Very good morning, Minister.
And good morning to you.
It is, I'm afraid to say, another day and another U-turn from the Department for Education. What has led to this one?
Well, what we've always said, and I'm sure you'll go back to when we first issued the guidance back in May, as schools were returning, welcoming back those first set of pupils for the 1st of June, we said this would be something that we'd keep under constant review. Then when we issued the further guidance for full return of schools back in early July, again we emphasised the importance of keeping this area under review. And actually having had the opportunity, as we saw the World Health Organization put out the details of their thoughts on this, one of the key areas that they recommended in areas of high transmission, that there is maybe some worth of wearing face masks in those areas of high transmission in education settings. Now, we're very fortunate, as you're aware and you've reported on repeatedly, actually right across the country, we're seeing the level of COVID transmission fall dramatically. So many parts of the country are increasingly safe, but there are some areas of the country where we've had to do local lockdowns, and we think that it is right in those few areas where we've had to do local lockdowns that it is right that secondary schools in communal areas, that youngsters do wear face coverings only in those secondary schools in those local lockdown areas. And of course we were listening to the WHO advice on that.
Yeah, the World Health Organization advice changed on Saturday. We spoke to Jenny Harris, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, on the programme on Monday and asked her directly about it. Why haven't we changed? She said the following: if you look at the World Health Organization, it's a consensus statement still because the evidence is not strong. It also identifies poor compliance, doesn't recommend covering should be worn when playing, she carried on. That was what the Deputy Chief Medical Officer was saying on Monday. So again, I'll ask, what has changed? What is the evidence that you are relying on? We always hear from you that you follow the science. Specifically, what is the evidence that this is something that needed to be brought in? Because, you know, you've had 4 days to come up with this.
We always follow and listen to the best scientific and medical advice, and that's why we're not recommending that face covering should be mandatory right across the country in all schools, because the best scientific and medical advice says that that isn't necessary. But that
was the Deputy Chief Medical Officer who has access to the same level of information and possibly, one would assume, given her academic background, with a greater deal of comprehension than you. And she was saying on Monday that this was not something that we needed to bring in. So I ask again, what has changed? Because to be honest with you, once again, it looks like you've been bumped into this by the Scottish Government, as with exam results.
Well, as you highlighted, what Jenny did sort of highlight, the fact that we shouldn't be bringing mandatory face coverings in communal areas right across the country into every secondary school. And that's not what we're doing. But we are recognising the fact that there are certain areas of the country where there's a high instance of, or a higher instance of coronavirus, that we're taking an extra precautionary measure. And when we do look at school return, the key thing, the thing that has informed us most of all, yes, it is the scientific and medical advice, and it's been on the basis of how we ensure that all schools are as safe as possible, they're as good environment as possible in order to welcome children back. And as we look towards next week and the following week, as more and more schools come back, we want to create an environment that's has safety at the absolute core of everything that we do, because the safety for pupils, the safety for those who work in schools is absolutely critical for all of us. But
I'm sorry
the overwhelming number of schools,
the lag factor in the Department for Education making decisions such as these, it does seem to be something of a problem. I'll repeat, on Saturday, the WHO changed its advice. On Monday, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer said we didn't have to change anything as regards face masks. You repeated those comments Monday afternoon. Yesterday morning, we had the Business Secretary saying on the programme, you know, there's absolutely no need for us to do this. You know, the science is not there. You're not telling me it was a coincidence that the Scottish Government, the Northern Irish Government, changed their advice and then the government in Westminster then happens to do the same?
Well, as you will have sort of noted, what we're recommending in terms of mandating the wearing of face coverings in communal areas for secondary schools is only in a very, very small number of areas in the country which are in local lockdown. And what we're doing is we recognise that there are added concerns in those communities about the transmission, but we also recognise how important it is for every child to get back. And as I'm sure you are sort of conscious of as well, it's important that we get all children back and all schools open, not just in those areas that aren't in lockdown, but also those schools that are in areas where there is lockdown, and making sure that we look at the advice closely, act on that advice, but making sure that we do it in a sensible and pragmatic way. That's why we're not mandating the wearing of face coverings in every school in the country. We're only mandating...
And instead what we're doing is we're passing responsibility for that decision to head teachers who already have so much on their plate in terms of getting kids back into school, catching up on learning. Now we're asking them to act as public health officials and decide whether or not face masks should be mandatory in their school. On what basis are we asking them to do that?
Well, what we've been consistent on in terms of our advice is that actually there isn't a need to be wearing face masks in schools.
But a head teacher can just change their mind. You're giving the responsibility to the head teachers.
Well, we've always had a system in this country where there's a lot of devolved responsibility for head teachers. And of course, as you'll go around the school estate, as you'll go around the whole school estate in this country, every school tends to be of a different shape and a different size. And we do recognise that sort of head teachers will sometimes need to show an element of discretion. That's why a few weeks ago, as I'm sure you also picked up, is the fact that actually we made the decision to make sure that face coverings were mandatory on home-to-school transport, because we felt that was the best route in order to be able to sort of not only to minimise the spread of transmission among pupils and in the wider community, but also making sure that there's real confidence about for children to be able to return to school. These are all measures that at every step is about making sure there's the safety of those young people at the heart of it. There's the safety of those people who teach in schools, and ensuring that actually all children are welcomed back into school in September. That's our priority. That's our focus as a government. It's a national priority.
Indeed. OK. Do you think that parents, pupils, teachers, head teachers have faith in your ability to see us through this, Mr Williamson? Statistics out today showing that, a report out today about the attainment gap in our schools. The latest data contained in this report for 2019. Since then, the COVID epidemic has had a profound impact on English education. Everything we have learned so far during the lockdown suggests the response to the health crisis will have a particularly adverse impact on poor and vulnerable children. Disadvantaged kids, at the end, by the time they take their GCSEs, were before the pandemic 18 months behind those from rather more affluent backgrounds. Isn't the simple truth of it all, Mr Williamson, that the government was failing in terms of education before the viral pandemic?
Well, what you'd seen over the last 10 years, you've been seeing a closing of the attainment gap. That's why today we're able to sort of say that, from September you're going to be seeing another 50 new free schools that have been really driving academic excellence, often in some of the most deprived areas of the country. And actually, the focus in terms of driving standards, whether it's the phonics revolution, in terms of giving youngsters the best start in life, all of these actions are having a real impact in terms of children's attainment. But you're right to say, is there more to do? There is so much more to do. That's why the focus is constantly there to drive standards and push further. And what you've seen over the last few months, not only have you seen a sort of effectively a setting up of almost a parallel education system with, the Oak National Academy, bringing some of the very best... Sorry, I didn't mean to speak across you. Sorry, I didn't hear you. I didn't mean to be rude there.
No, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry for... Similarly, but the data says the gap between rich and poor kids has stopped closing. The experts behind this report say it will increase. If we want a demonstration of the situation we're in at the moment, yesterday we saw the head of Ofqual resigning. A couple of days ago, we saw you being nominated for MP of the Year.
So every bit of the government's focus, it recognises that we've got to get children back into school. The best way for children to be able to, from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, to close that attainment gap is to see them back into school. That's why we're putting that focus of getting children back into school in September, what every single year group. We saw over 1.6 million children back in school before the summer holidays. We want to welcome all children back into school.
Resigns and that
is the best way of closing the attainment gap, making sure that we have children from every background, including and most importantly from the most disadvantaged background, back in the classroom, sat in front of their teachers who will inspire them and give them the encouragement and the support in order to achieve the very best in themselves. That's why we're going to be getting every child back into the classroom in September. That's our focus. That's what we're going to deliver on.
Gavin Williamson, good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.